Welcome to the Carbon Trust Route to Net Zero Europe event, part of a global series of one-day virtual events focusing on different areas of the world. With COP26 behind us, the focus is no longer on why, but how we get to net zero. Today, we're going to learn from climate leaders in Europe, listen to real life examples, and take action, hopefully within your organization, or at least get some tips and tricks along the way. With so much uncertainty in the world set against the backdrop of accelerating climate change, now is the time to collaborate. And we at the Carbon Trust are here to help you with that. So let's take a look at today's event and also how you can get involved. So using the power of technology, I'm going to show you Glisser, which you should be logged into right now. And everything that you need to know is on the right-hand side. So first of all, if English isn't your first language, you can always choose subtitles. There are 16 languages that we're providing captions for. You'll also find social over here as well. So we are on Twitter. That's just at the Carbon Trust. And we're also on LinkedIn. Excuse me. If you want to download the slides, you'll find them here as well. So everything over on the right-hand side. And periodically, you'll also see polls popping up like the one when you joined, asking you where you are from. So welcome wherever you're joining us from. This event is live. So if you want to ask a question, please, again, you'll find it on the right-hand side. And we will take those questions. The ones that we don't have time for, the Carbon Trust team will get back to you. It's also being recorded, so this video will be made available afterwards and you'll be emailed a link. Full bios for the speakers are in the resources section as well. Okay, let's accelerate the mission to net zero and find smarter ways to turn intent into impact. Our first guest, it's my great pleasure to welcome Tom DeLay, who is the Chief Executive of the Carbon Trust. Tom, over to you.
Ralph, thank you very much indeed. And good morning to everybody who has joined us. This, as Ralph was saying, is the fourth of our Route to Net Zero events, short, one-day, punchy events, hopefully making good use of your time, allowing us to put local context onto very much a global issue. So the reach has got to be global, but we understand that the context really is regional, and that's the basis of our format. Very briefly about the Carbon Trust, for those of you who don't know us well, we've been around for about 20 years. We've now got about 320 experts working around the world. We have offices in Singapore and Beijing, South Africa, Mexico, with presence in Brazil and DC. We have an office in London, a very multinational office, but we're particularly proud to now have an office in Amsterdam. It's the fastest growing office within the Carbon Trust network. We have great ambitious plans for Amsterdam and for Europe more broadly. Our approach to working is to provide essentially advice and support to corporates, to governments, to banks, both commercial and non-commercial, subnational governments, smaller businesses, but often larger businesses, and help them on their journey towards net zero. We very much see our progress and our mission, which is to accelerate the transition to a decarbonised future, being delivered, as far as we're concerned, by seeing success amongst our clients and partners. It's how far they go and how quickly they can move towards net zero that really is the articulation of mission impact, as far as we're concerned. I mentioned Carbon Trust Europe and the Amsterdam office. We are ambitious for Europe, and for a number of very good reasons. Europe is a global leader in addressing climate change and is likely to build on that position over the next few years. The EU Green Deal is a very comprehensive package. It covers all kinds of angles that we'll come back to over the course of today. And in addition to that, it's rooted in the fundamental principle of resource efficiency being at the root of everything that you can do, which is something that we've been arguing for a long time. A resource efficient, competitive economic sector right across the region that will actually show the world, I think, in terms of what can be done. There's no question 2050 is going to look very different from an economic perspective to what we have today, and almost everything we do from now on building economic growth into particularly Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly, but also other more developed regions, it's all going to have to be new products, services, fit for the future, decarbonized. So we believe that Europe is a leader. Corporates within Europe are particularly strong. We know that well over 250 organizations have set 1.5 degree net zero targets. We also know how difficult it is to set a 1.5 degree science-based target, how big a shift that is from a 2 degree science-based target. It's almost bringing forward by about a decade some of the decisions that you need to make beyond the short term into the medium term, the deep decarbonization that is very challenging to achieve. So we see leadership right across Europe, and we're delighted to be building that presence very strongly. Lastly, very quickly, it would be remiss not to mention COP26 in Glasgow. I was lucky to be there for a few days, and just to give a few personal perspectives on that. The first is that whilst some of the headline ambitions were not met, there was very significant progress in a number of areas that have been particularly entrenched and intractable in previous COPs. I'll highlight forestry, which I think was an achievement. I think coal actually being talked about and recognized as something that we now need to move away from, be it a phase out or a phase down. It was the first time that's happened. And of course, in the second week, the US and China having almost a bilateral agreement to work together on this gave a lot of the momentum that I think maybe the headline targets were hiding. So yes, a lot of progress, a lot of momentum. I don't think we can take it for granted, though, that success is there and that we can declare victory at this point, and for a number of reasons. Firstly, there really is a lot of a lock-in of assets, people whose businesses rely on assets that are fully depreciated, yet deliver an economic rent. Lock-in in terms of behaviors. It's very hard, very politically sensitive to challenge some behaviors, which I personally believe many people would embrace the change in, but nevertheless, it's sensitive to get there. So lock-in is difficult. Compound that with vested interests, people who have a short to medium interest in maintaining the status quo, support essentially an alternative narrative. We're not going to go to net zero. There is an alternative. Just stick with what we've got at the moment and suffer the consequences. That would be disastrous. It's obviously not something that we are pushing towards, but we need to be conscious of the risk of that. The one other thing I picked up in Glasgow was, a real greenwash tide. It was almost coming in every day, more greenwash, more things coming along that were unsubstantiated, that were very much statements for the future, but with very little to actually build on in terms of reality. Greenwash, I think, is an inevitable consequence of the build-up and momentum that we're seeing right across the sector globally and within Europe. And I think greenwash is something that we need to be particularly conscious of if we're to really deliver the change that we need. And at the end of the day, transparency. When people ask me, well, how do we deal with greenwash? It's not going to be through workshops and talking about it. It's going to be ensuring that everybody, every government, every organization, every civil group, every subnational government, bank, and other financial institution ensures transparency. It's expected of organizations around the world in a way that maybe other confidential information is not expected to be shared. The minute you're talking about sustainability, there is an expectation that you'll be transparent, and we can help on that as well. So look, let me just wrap up by asking you to watch with me just a very short video summarizing some of the key points about the Carbon Trust's approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I think there's so much excitement after COP26, but one of the key things that came out of the Glasgow event was the need to involve business. Now, We Mean Business are a global non-profit coalition working with the world's most influential businesses to take action on climate change. Their mission is to catalyse business and policy action to halve global emissions by 2030, in line with a 1.5-degree pathway. Here to tell us more is their CEO, Maria Mendeluce.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for connecting today. I'm Maria Mendeluce. I'm the CEO of the Women Business Coalition, and I'm going to talk to you about the climate journey as part of this session on the route to net zero. I work at the Women Business Coalition. We are a global non-profit coalition of leading NGOs working with the world's most influential businesses to take action on climate. You can see our partners. We also work with an extensive network of partners and initiatives, notably the Science Based Targets Initiative, SME Climate Hub, Mission Possible, the Climate Pledge, amongst others. Our theory of change is that if businesses step up and are ambitious, and we advocate for the policy change that is needed, policy frameworks will be more ambitious, and then that will lead to greater policy ambition because both businesses and governments will be aligned. We came to COP, and the current situation is complicated. The streets are complaining. The youth is upset. Emissions keep growing, and we are in the middle of a big energy crisis. By the way, it doesn't have anything to do with the energy transition, rather the opposite. So the energy transition will resolve some of the anger in the street, some of the emission issues, increases, and the energy volatility. We also come out of a pandemic, which has been really tough, and we're still recovering. And while there's been a lot of movements to build back better, there's still the tension of, will we build back better, or will we build back to where we were before? And hopefully we won't, but that's something that we need to monitor closely. In terms of climate, we are in a climate emergency. As the Times says, climate is everything. And that's how I feel personally, because I live in this world. We came to COP, and the prospect was not really good. The IPCC report back in August said that we are really have very little chances to meet the 1.5. And so we all aligned behind COP because we wanted to have a 1.5 alive. Let me talk to you about my conclusions around COP. We came with high expectations, sometimes too high expectations, right? Thinking that pledges will convert into emission reductions right away. The UK government has done a fantastic job. They have been working really hard, like the French government did in the past, and other governments that have held the presidency. And that has shown many, many fruits, both in terms of the actual negotiations, but also in terms of the many pledges that were presented on the first week. We came to Glasgow, and we had rallied businesses to unite their voices, to ask for very concrete tasks. These were represented in the Financial Times at the beginning of the COP as a summary of the letter that we had sent to the G20 ministers. In fact, I think COP delivered more than the G20 did on climate, and that's good news. So the first task was that we wanted to keep 1.5 alive. Well, 1.5 is currently on intensive care. We know if we add up to all the pledges, etc., we're bringing the emission reductions to 1.8 on a long-term trajectory. But if we look at what has been announced for the 2030, we're in a much worse situation, 2.4. So there is a big gap, and a gap that needs to fill in the next decade. And we came to COP with a request to countries to update the NDCs. And what we got is that while some presented, others have not presented yet, and COP have told them, please present them by 2022. So the pressure is on countries to present their NDCs that is aligned with what the science is saying that they need to do, which is to reduce emissions by 45%. At Women Business, we say yes, half emissions by 2030. That's the objective that business need to do. That's the objective that we ask governments to have for 2030. So still, the good thing, 1.5 is alive. The bad thing is that the current pledges don't get us there, and we need to bring 1.5 out of intensive care. The second good thing was the global stocktake. This is really welcome. And there's nothing better than measuring progress and reporting on progress so that we can track, benchmark, compare, and instigate this race to zero. And so it's fantastic. From our perspective, it would be much better if we had more clarity on how the non-party stakeholders saw. How is business input going to be considered in the global stocktake? We will be working on it. And finally, on Article 6, fantastic news, because after 6 years, we finally concluded the negotiations around Article 6, while some details remain. There are some concerns on environmental integrity which remain by some groups, and this is understandable because in the past, this was not done very well. But I do hope that the business community and governments have now the maturity to seek to use this instrument to add ambition, not to reduce the ambition that needs to happen in their business or in their countries. In terms of finance, developing countries are not happy, and they're rightly so, because developed economies had promised 100 billion and they are still to be delivered. We think they will be delivered by 2023. We hope they will be delivered by 2022. We did agree on a process to get long-term finance post-2025. And we also have doubled the collective adaptation finance, which is really good. Still not enough, but I think definitely in the right direction. We have launched regarding loss and damage a 2-year program, and also, a 2-year program to develop global adaptation goals. And despite the importance, adaptation is still not as prioritized compared to mitigation, and details are lacking. But we know that in the next COP, adaptation is going to be a very important moment. And so we look at the Egyptian presidency together with the help of the British presidency to definitely move fast track the work on adaptation. And finally, there was a lot of ups and downs around the end of fossil fuels to phase down unabated coal power and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. And I know that there were some issues around phase down, phase out. In my view, let's be pragmatic. You need to phase down to phase out. This is quite extraordinary to have 195 countries agreeing on what needs to happen in terms of coal. Coal is not in the picture. Anyone that has coal assets, is investing in stranded assets. So the overall verdict is that COP, in my view, it was a good COP. Okay, the direction for business is really clear. Now, the speed and scale of implementation of the countries are insufficient. We absolutely need to have emissions by 2030, and we need to do everything we can, whether it's in the governments or business, to take this commitment seriously and convert it into action. So, as I said before at COP, we discussed a lot about the why and the what, especially in Paris. I remember discussing a lot about the what. Well, this COP has been all about the how fast can we have emissions, and how much money would be required. And for the first time, from the business perspective, we saw the business coming with their best commitments, and I'm going to talk more about it now. The finance sector also mobilizing for the first time, which is quite extraordinary, and then incredible number of heads of state and a good conclusion of the negotiations. So at the end, we had before going to COP, the 2030 commitment showed 2.4 on average emission increase. After COP, it's around 2.3. While this is a small, I think what has been more remarkable is the net zero promises, that have brought it from 2 degrees, this is the long term, to 1.8. Every fraction of the degree matters. Some might think that this is not good enough, but I would ask you to please remember where we were when we were in Paris, where the emission pledges were far above this and even before that. So if you put this into context, yeah, we have done good progress in terms of the pledges and commitments, not in terms of the emissions that unfortunately keep increasing and require urgent action. So what does this mean for business? So I often talk to the business community about, and they ask me, what should we do? Well, I think business community first, they need to set science-based targets to the highest level of ambition. And those targets are going to have two sides. One, their own operations, scope 1 and 2, and their supply chain. For some industries, supply chain emissions can be between 50 and 95% of their emissions. So I have heard now more than ever a lot of conversation on how to decarbonize the supply chain, how to measure it, what actions can be done, because companies can perfectly invest in their own companies. It makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to the supply chain, it requires a collaborative approach. I think as companies set those levels of ambitions, they will be starting to grasp opportunities through innovation and investment that will allow them to even strengthen and improve that level of ambition. And I know from many companies I speak to that once they set a target that they think is very ambitious, soon, because they put in place all the mechanisms to reduce those emissions, they realize that actually is achievable and they can ratchet and can increase that ambition. And that's what we're encouraging companies to do. The second area, so mitigation, is adaptation. I think climate change is having an impact, and companies need to look more seriously on how to adapt to the current climate change and the expected climate change. The third point is around policy coherence. To actually, companies, there is like 2,000 companies that have set science-based targets. Let's say there are around 5,000, 6,000 companies that are really serious in the international space, working on climate. Well, if they're serious about setting net zero plans, they also need to be serious when they discuss with policymakers so that there's policy coherence, and what they are asking policymakers is aligned with their net zero ambition. And the final point, which came very strongly, is accountability. Companies need to report progress periodically. They need to help, they need to benchmark with others so that we can see how things are progressing. That progress will inspire others to move further. And because climate change is a collective problem, the more companies that are engaged, the better. The competition is not about emission reduction. The competition is about who can get to net zero sooner. At Women Business, we developed this framework for climate leadership that has 4 steps. It's called the 4 A's. First one, ambition. We encourage companies to commit, to set science-based targets, to set net zero targets and have emissions by 2030, and to factor in those plans the value chain. And we do this through the initiative that I mentioned before, science-based targets and business ambition for 1.5, which is part of the same family. If you can do that faster to 2040, please join the Climate Pledge. And if you're an SME, you have a specific platform, SME Climate Hub. All these commitments are part of the Race to Zero. Action. Work on your own operations, but as you know, the supply chain is going to be the most difficult part. So work in action collaboratives with others. Talk to investors, because investors are very interested now in aligning the portfolio with 1.5. Show them what you're doing, work with them on that decarbonization pathway, and connect climate to equality, to the just transition. Advocate, I mentioned before, make your voice heard. Sign letters, talk to policymakers, show them progress, give them the confidence that they can put in place regulations that will bring us further. Talk to your industry associations. If they're not doing the right thing, tell them, align with net zero, tell them, speak your mind, convince them. And if you cannot convince them, leave. Okay, because if you're part of those associations and you cannot change them, leave. okay, so that you can focus on working on associations that are aligned with you. And finally, report on progress, listen and learn from stakeholders, integrate climate in your executive pay, into your boards, etc. So all in all, we have been quite successful on raising, through different campaigns, on raising the number of companies that are committed to net zero. If your company is not part of this, please, I think you are in the wrong story. Please join them, talk to them, talk to your peers, and try to adhere to them. Whether it's the Climate Pledge, the Business Ambition, SME Climate Hub, so that we can not only have ambitious goals that will lead to actions that will lead to emission reductions. So thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the rest of the conference. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Now, many of you will be familiar with the European Union's European Green Deal, but do you know about the European Climate Pact? The Climate Pact is an opportunity for people, communities, and organizations to participate in climate action across Europe. As they say themselves, the climate crisis is real, and the EU has committed itself to doing something about it. Katarzyna Baluka is here to tell us more.
Hello everyone, my name is Katarzyna Bałcka-Dębska. I represent the European Commission, Directorate General for Climate Action, and I am responsible for the European Climate Pact. It's my honor and pleasure to be addressing you today. I would have loved to be able to discuss with you the European Climate Pact and what we try to do there, because the European Climate Pact is about engaging with everyone. So normally I would start by asking you, what have you done for climate today? What have I done for climate today? And why is it so important? It's because with the European Climate Pact, we are entering people's worlds. So my world, here I am in my home office, as a civil servant, as a communicator, as climate activist, as a mother. And this is what Climate Pact is all about. What have I done? What can I do? Wearing my different hats in my worlds that I am in. In Europe, we're actually quite fortunate with a general perception of the challenges ahead. Europeans overall recognize that there is a problem, we have a challenge. They even already are taking actions in their lives. And they all also agree that the greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced to make the EU climate neutral by 2050. And why is it so important? It is so important because unless we all act together, we're not going to make it on time. That's a fun slide for you and fun part of this presentation, because how do you talk to people? How do you talk to organizations so that we all do something? The best way is to enter into values, into what we do with pleasure and what we love. There's my favorite example here of why we take action as individuals and as companies. And that's the bottle of Bordeaux wine from 2050 that was created so that the wine lovers can have a taste of how will their favorite wine taste in 2050 when some of the grapes used for the production of this wine would have dried out. And unsurprisingly, the wine lover said, but this is not my favorite Bordeaux wine. It doesn't taste like it used to. And this is how we can enter, and we need to start to think about climate challenges lying ahead of us, that it's not happening somewhere far away, but that it's happening here. And what does it mean for me in my everyday life? And so this is the PACT approach. Our motto, my world, my action, our planet. What can I do in my world so that together we act for the planet? And I'm especially happy to be with you in a way today, because we need multipliers, and anyone can become multipliers, any organization. We are looking for ambassadors, and we are looking for pledges. We are also gathering feedback. What do people and organizations say? Because of course, the packages of regulatory and political solutions that are either in preparation or on the table are complicated. They enter every sector of the economy and of our lives. Sometimes they are controversial. So how do we discuss it in all honesty so that we are actually willing to act? And then we're trying to adjust this information to my world. What does the Green Deal, what does the Fit for 55 package mean for me in my world? And the challenge is, of course, that the moment politics enters into people's lives and habits, it becomes complicated. But of course, climate challenge is scientific. It's a scientific problem and challenge and opportunity that is now very much across policy and industrial areas. So what is the pact? The pact is about taking action, about having an opportunity to act and inspire each other. And what is really important is that anyone can take action and everyone can contribute. Why is it so important? It's because as the EU, of course, what we have on the table is the European Green Deal. We have the climate law. We have actually put into law our targets for lowering CO2 emissions. But unless there is also climate action and acceptance by citizens, unless we as citizens feel we have a say, we are not going to make it. The race to climate neutrality will be won or lost through that. In the corporate setting, what I like to say, it's about sort of closing the loop between supply and demand. Sometimes I hear, I'm just back from the SME Assembly, where we discussed it with smaller companies, but there isn't enough demand and it's very complicated. And then I always say, when I look at my daughter, she's 15, before she buys something, she looks at it from all sides, whether this is green enough. This is, of course, influencing our choices as consumers as well. So it's not about consumers of tomorrow. It's about consumers of today that are really starting to look at these elements. So this is Fit for 55 package. And why I wanted to show it to you is because often in industrial setting discussions, we tend to concentrate on how complicated things are and on the fact that yet another transition, we have a twin transition, digital and green, are complicated. But unless we look at it as a package of opportunities as well as challenges, then again, we won't be able to go fast enough. In the discussions, I still sometimes hear the kind of not really disputing of the baseline, how many years do we have and how fast do we have to go? But in the pact, we feel a bit, it's a bit of waste of time of discussing this. Let's spend this time in discussing solutions and how do we do things, and let's agree on the baseline. The timeframes are clear, 2030, 2050. Can we make it? Can we go together fast enough? And let's really concentrate on the discussions on how to do it. So this is what we want to achieve with the pact. More people talking about this, being honest about it, more people finding it easier to engage with climate action in wherever they are in their worlds, whatever their world is, that communities and ecosystems are supported, because we have found with the pact there's already a lot of action going on out there. And that there is public support for climate action growing, enabling both policymakers and industry to act. And for the moment, in the pact, there are already several ways to be involved. You can become an active climate pact ambassador, you can make a pledge, maybe organize a peer parliament, or organize any kind of dialogue seminar and a conference. So who are ambassadors? And this is my sort of direct offer and call to action for you. Ambassadors, anyone can apply to become an ambassador. And we have ambassadors that range from mayors to school children. We have people who are activists. We have people who go and organize discussions in furthest parts of the world, like Vanessa here. As I said, I was just at the SME Assembly in Slovenia, and I met this lovely lady Urska, who is actually helping SMEs on their transition to climate and environmental neutrality. An interesting thing about her is that she's also a startupper. So she looked at this very innovative startups world, and she also said, well, every company has to have a chance to become clean. So these are the kind of inspirational people stories and models that we're trying to harvest in the pact, so that anyone wanting to make the transition can actually do it. One can also do pledges. Pledges are nothing new in policy settings. We have tried to make it as meaningful and as exciting as possible. So you can make an individual pledge. You can choose from 16 steps on the platform of our partners Count Us In. Count Us In is exciting as a platform because it actually operates globally, and it translates every step you take into how much CO2 have you actually saved. This is an offer for those who are only starting, and we need everyone, and no action is too small, don't forget that. And then there are organization pledges, and this is what might be most relevant to you. And we're looking at pledges that are big and small. On the one hand, we look for, of course, the most ambitious ones, where we are greening servers, we are greening our operations and products, but we are also looking for companies and organizations to really become multipliers of the pact and of its message. So how about also engaging employees in climate action by organizing competitions, who bikes more to work, or by supporting them in having more plant-based diets in the canteens, or when we take shorter business trips, maybe they don't have to be done by plane. It's also about our value chain. How do we look at our value chain? Do we exchange companies in our value chain if they're not green enough? Or can we help them transform? It's also about climate slogans in our advertising campaigns. As I said, there is a generation that already appreciates companies who do that. So it's really thinking along the life cycle and around the ecosystem of the organization that one represents to see what can I do, what can we do together. Maybe it's about joining up with other organizations in my setting. There are some examples of pledges already on our website, if you are interested, and they go from railway associations to language schools. And there are some examples of non-commercial operations as well. It's also about cooperating with cities. In the Climate Pact, we are cooperating with a covenant of mayors, and we are looking for good models of how a city can join up with businesses, with citizens, to make sure that car charging stations are where they need to be, or that we set participatory budgets with our citizens who are interested in what kind of city they live in. After COVID, we understood much better how important it is, what is around us in where we live, and that we want to have influence on that. And finally, if you are already even more advanced on your climate journey and have energy to do that, we are asking everyone to have conversations. Gather 5 to 10 colleagues have a coffee together, grab toolkits that we have prepared with the questions and some facts, scientific facts around 3 topics that are crucial to the green transitions, around energy, around sustainable mobility, and around consumption. And let us know what are people willing to do and what are maybe ideas that you as a group have to accelerate the transitions that need to happen. And we will also feed that into the Conference on the Future of Europe. So we are really listening, and it really can have an impact. If you liked what you just heard and you want to support the European Climate Pact or be informed, we have a newsletter. Please do that. And I very much hope that you will join us, and we will move the European climate movement together. Thank you very much.